Henry Hill, a former mobster and associate of the Lucchese family crime, rose to infamy at the 1970s as a key figure in organized crime activities in New York City. Hill was born on the 11th of June of 1943 in Brooklyn, New York. Growing up in a predominantly Italian-American neighborhood, Hill became involved in criminal activities at a young age. He was mentored by Paul Vario, a powerful captain in the Lucchese crime family, and eventually became an integral member of the organized crime world.
The city was bustling with wartime activities when Carmela Hill brought her first son home from the hospital on June 11, 1943. The housewife and her husband Henry, an electrician at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, were overjoyed. They already had 4 girls, and now finally they had a boy. They named him Henry Jr.
When Henry was born, for the first time ever, according to my mother, my father sent her a dozen roses, but he didn't send them to her. He wrote the card to my son. He really was proud when he had this son.
Henry Boy, as they called him, joined his parents and 4 sisters in a 3-bedroom house in the Brownsville section of Brooklyn.
It was a warm neighborhood. It was people who were just getting out of the ghetto, people climbing through education, going to school and becoming somebody.
Henry's mother, Carmela, had come to America from Sicily at the age of 2 and was raised in an orphanage after her mother died. At 17, she met a hard-drinking 19-year-old Irishman named Henry Hill at a neighborhood dance. Henry was a union electrician who was supporting his mother and 2 younger brothers. Carmela felt an instant attraction. The young man was not only handsome, but clearly responsible. They had 8 children by 1951, 5 girls and 3 boys, including Henry Jr. Carmela took great pride in her Sicilian cooking, and young Henry saw an angle for himself. He realized that by joining his mother in the kitchen, he could not only learn how to cook, but get some extra attention.
As a member of the Lucchese family, Hill was involved in a wide range of criminal activities, including loan sharking and illegal substances, trafficking, and also most infamous involvement was in the Lufthansa heist of 1978, where nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry was stolen from a Lufthansa cargo at the John Kennedy Airport. The heist, orchestrated by James Burke, also known as Jimmy the Gent, became one of the largest cash thefts in the United States history.
On Sunday, the 11th of December, 1978, Jimmy Burke's crew, acting on a tip-off from Henry Hill, pulled off the largest cash robbery ever committed on American soil.
5 heavily armed and masked men the day fled with an estimated $3 million in cash and $300,000 in jewelry from the Lufthansa Airlines cargo hangar at New York's Kennedy Airport.
The robbery was front-page news across America. The actual figure stolen would rise to $5 million in cash and $1 million in jewels.
The news of the robbery was not only on the radio, but it was television. Of course, the tabloids splashed it across the front page.
Within a day or two, law enforcement knew for sure, based on what their informants were telling them, that it was Jimmy Burke's crew that had carried out the robbery.
The FBI's first breakthrough was the discovery of the van used in the robbery, driven by Stax Edwards. Before the FBI could interrogate Stax, Burke had him executed. The killing spree had begun.
It was very hard to develop evidence in the Lufthansa case because people who were involved started turning up dead.
Hill used his share of the robbery proceeds to purchase a restaurant on Queens Boulevard. The suite initially aiming to run as a legitimate business and provide distance between himself and his mob associates. However, within several months, the place had become another mob hangout, and Hill later said the members of Lucchese and Gambino crews moved to the club and also including high-ranking Gambino family members who were always there.
Henry Hill had been initiated into the underworld. He was enjoying everything that the mob lifestyle had to offer. Still, some part of Henry remained loyal to his real family and the values of his father, including patriotism. So the 17-year-old enlisted in the Army in 1960 as a paratrooper. His father was more than willing to sign the papers for his underage son. Private Henry Hill was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He became a cook and a member of the prestigious 82nd Airborne.
I think my father thought he would be normal then, once Henry went in the service, and that he would conform to regular life.
Whatever it was that inspired Henry to enlist faded rapidly. He would go AWOL to take care of business and return in a limousine. Hill was finally arrested and discharged in 1963.
Shortly before midnight on the 6th of April of 1967, Helen DeSimone drove to the Air France cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport with an empty suitcase, the largest Hill could find. And in side connection, Robert McMahon said that the two should just walk in, as people often came to the terminal to pick up lost baggage. And also, DeSimone and Hill entered the unsecured area unchallenged and unlocked the door with a duplicate key. Using a small flashlight, they loaded 7 bags into the suitcase and left within $420,000 US. And the alarm was raised, and there was nothing to be heard, and no shots fired, but no one was injured. The theft was not discovered until the following Monday, when a Wells Fargo arrived to pick up the cash to be delivered to the French-American Banking Corporation.
In 1968, Hill learned through an airport insider that $500,000 in cash was being stored at the Air France depot at Kennedy Airport. But there was a problem. Hill informed his mentor, Jimmy Burke, about a straight-shooting guard who stood in between them and the cash. Together, they hatched a plan to relieve the guard of his keys.
The way they did it, they spent many weeks looking over the guy who was in charge of this operation.
Boom, they pull the keys, make a copy of the key, put the keys back in the guy's pants. Now, he goes back to work the next day, but they have the key to the Air France safe.
On the 8th of April 1968, Henry Hill stole over $400,000 from Air France. The Air France heist was headline news. Obeying mafia law, Henry split the haul with the Vario crew.
There is no greater gift you can give one of those guys than $500,000 in stolen money.
Money talks in that business, and if Henry was going out and sharing the loot with others, then they were going to respect him.
In 1980, facing multiple legal troubles and fearing for his life, Henry Hill made the monumental decision to become an informant for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. Hill's corporation was instrumental in dismantling the crime family and exposing the inner workings of organized crime in return for his corporation. Hill entered the Witness Protection Program, which located him and his family under new identities.
Within weeks of the wedding, Henry was back on the streets with Jimmy Burke and the rest of his fellow wise guys. Henry, like most wise guys, was rarely home. He was on the streets, making deals. At first, Karen was able to turn a blind eye to her husband's criminal activities. Then, in December 1965, Hill was arrested for transporting untaxed cigarettes across state lines. He was sent to jail for several hours and paid a fine. Karen could no longer fool herself into believing that Henry was a union bricklayer. Instead of being angry, she embraced the mob lifestyle.
Karen saw the money. She liked it just as much as Henry did. She saw the action. I mean, Karen was a female wise guy.
A year after their wedding, a son, Greg, was born. 2 years later, Karen gave birth to a daughter, Abigail. She was frustrated to find that her gangster husband was an absentee father.
Despite being under the protection of the Witness Protection Program, Hill struggled to adapt to the life outside the mafia. His criminal past and identity became public knowledge when he appeared on television interviews and collaborated with author Nicholas Pileggi to write the book Wise Guy, which served as the basis of the 1990 film Goodfellas. Hill's involvement in the film further increased his public exposure.
What had begun to absorb Henry's time was telling his own life story. He had made a deal with renowned journalist Nicholas Pileggi, who wrote a real-life thriller based on Hill's experiences in the mob. Henry figured that if the New York wise guys were still gunning for him, the least he could do was preserve his story for posterity and make some good money while he was at it. In 1986, Wise Guy, Life in a Mafia Family was an instant bestseller. Director Martin Scorsese bought the film rights and cast Ray Liotta in the role of Henry Hill. Hill received about $500,000 for the book and movie rights to his life story. Henry did not enjoy this financial windfall for long. Most of it was confiscated by the IRS for back taxes. Karen stayed with Henry even though their relationship was in tatters. By this point, they were living on a 5-acre ranch in Washington State.
And Hill's decision to become an informant was met with mixed reactions. Some praised his cooperation as a blow to organized crime, and others criticized him for betraying his loyalty and violating the code of silence. And additionally, some questioned the accuracy of Hill's accounts and suggested that he embellished certain details of his life to enhance his public persona.
On May 23, 1980, Henry Hill agreed to testify against the mob and enter the Witness Protection Program.
He was so nervous he could barely speak. I remember he wanted to call his wife to tell his wife where he was, and I let him use the phone in my office, and he probably dialed his home number 5 times. He couldn't get the number straight. He was just so shook up about what was going on.
She was, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going in the program. I'm not leaving my parents. You go, meaning Henry, and I'm staying here with the kids. I don't care. I'm not afraid of Burke.
But Karen herself was facing a lengthy prison sentence and quickly changed her mind. Henry, Karen, and their 2 children entered witness protection over Memorial Day weekend 1980. Hill and his wife were given immunity in exchange for Henry's testimony against the Lucchese crime family, including the men Henry had come to regard as his own family, Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke. Henry was one of the few people alive who could expose details of the still unsolved Lufthansa heist. His decision made him a marked man.
And after leaving the Witness Protection Program, Hill faced ongoing legal troubles and struggled from diseases. Then he continued to make public appearances and participate in speaking engagements and capitalize his own infamy. And however, his later years were marked by personal challenges, including arrests and a decline in health. Henry Hill passed away on the 12th of June of 2012 at the age of 69. Henry Hill's life journey from a mobster to informant remains captivating and complex, and also very narrative in the history of the mafia crimes.